Prague off the beaten track, Vltava takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.
Welcome to Prague off the beaten track. Have you ever heard of Rohanský ostrov or Rohan Island? No worries if not. This island, that isn't quite an island anymore, tends to fly under the radar, I think even for many Prague locals. Tucked between Karlín and the Vltava River, it used to be a proper island, later transformed into a forgotten industrial zone. And now it's the focus of one of the Prague's, I think, most ambitious urban redevelopment projects. To get here, I took the metro to Křižíkova station in Karlín and walked just a few minutes before stepping onto what used to be an actual island. For decades, this place was pretty much a forgotten corner of the city. It served as a dumping ground for rubble excavated during the construction of the Prague metro and other projects. There's still a concrete plant here, and if you listen carefully from time to time, you will probably hear birds, because there are quite a lot of trees here now, but you might also hear a kind of rumble of a heavy truck or maybe even a distant boat. This part of Prague was actually long neglected, and you can still see traces of that. Broken fencing, leftover mounds of earth, and the kind of general vibe of a construction zone. But things are changing. As I look back towards the city center along the bike and pedestrian path, I can already see sleek new apartment blocks rising, modern, stylish, and definitely on the pricier side. For much of the 20th century, Karlín and nearby Libeň were, however, working class districts overlooked even by the communist regime. But since the, I think, early 2000s, and especially after 2010, this whole area has been steadily transforming, and Rohanský ostrov is a perfect example of that change. A bit deeper into the area, I come across the black information box with one glass wall, an info booth by the architectural team managing this transformation. Along the sides are illustrations and texts explaining how this place will be reshaped. The texts are actually both in Czech and English. So if you speak only English, don't worry, because you will be able to read that. And it will be reshaped not just for housing, but for living with the river, as the architects say. One key feature is a new park called Maniny, designed as both a public green space and a flood buffer. During high water levels, the river will be allowed to overflow into a shallow artificial pool in the park. So instead of fighting the river, this design channels it safely, or is supposed to do so, while creating space for wildlife and relaxation. Even the planned food bridge will be floodable, meant to disappear underwater when the Vltava rises. It's all part of a vision for a more resilient, nature-sensitive Prague. But even though much of this is still on paper or under construction, change is already visible if you come here. So right now I'm walking along a newly built bike and footpath cutting through the area. It's surprisingly lively even on a weekday. Joggers pass by, mothers push strollers, cyclists zip along. On this beautiful May day, it's honestly a joy to walk here. I can't quite see the river right now. There's young greenery growing between me and the water. But if I keep going, I'll reach the area where Rohanský ostrov was gradually joined with Libeňský ostrov and Maniny. These used to be real islands separated by the river's arms. Over time, they were filled in and are now part of the embankment, though you can definitely still feel the outline of what once was an island. Now, checking the map on my phone, I spot a smaller path that runs close to the river, less polished, I think, more secluded, and that's exactly the kind of thing that I like to explore. So I veer off the main path and follow this less beaten track, curious to see what it holds. The narrower path isn't exactly inviting, I have to say. At least in this place you can't really get to the water. The trees and underbrush are thick. I pass what looks like a homeless encampment with a few improvised huts tucked among the trees. One stretch of the path smells a bit unpleasant, which I suppose makes sense, as there are clearly no public facilities nearby. Further on, the ground is still covered with old concrete panels, remnants of some industrial use long gone. Nature, though, is creeping back. Bushes push through cracks in the concrete, and a quiet sort of beauty takes over. Then the concrete gives way to bare earth, and I find myself on a more natural stretch again. I keep walking along the river, following the ghost outlines of islands that are no longer islands, but haven't quite forgotten they once were. By the way, across the river I can see the first new buildings of the former Holešovice port, once a bustling industrial harbour, now another area being slowly transformed. Definitely a topic for a future episode of Czechcast, I think. But today I'm staying on this side, and it's the right-hand side of the river. As I walk closer to the river, I stop by one of the taller trees. I think it's a poplar. And just as I approach, a bright flash of yellow catches my eye. A golden oriole takes off and disappears into the greenery. And from the hollow of the tree, I think you, as well as I, can hear the high-pitched calls of its young. Now, looking up, I notice more nests tucked among the branches, and it seems there's an entire colony of orioles here, quietly nesting in the middle of what's still a partially industrial zone. So I think it's a surprising and beautiful reminder that even this close to the center of Prague, nature is finding its own space to return and thrive. So as I trot along the earth path, not far from where I spoke last, I come across a large black-painted boat moored along the embankment. It's called Botel Marina, I can read. From where I'm standing, I can see a terrace on the upper deck and small garden nearby. Right next to it is a small golf course labeled Prague City Golf. It's not a full-size 18-hole course, more of a practice area, probably for locals or anyone looking to warm up their swing. I imagine some of the golfers might even stay at the Botel, which adds to the charm of this unusual corner of Prague. But that's not my stop. I keep walking through the layered, shifting landscape of Rohanský ostrov. So eventually I reach Libeňský most or Libeň Bridge. Technically I'm in Libeň and not Karlín now. Checking the map, I see that Palmovka is the closest metro station, and suddenly I'm struck by a memory, I have to say, because I actually lived around here in the 1990s. Sorry, not 1950s, but 1990s. It must have been just a 5 or 10 minute walk from this spot, and yet I never came here at that time, not once. I'd heard of Rohanský ostrov, but I never walked its full length. And I certainly hadn't realized how much was hidden back here, behind trees, warehouses, and decades of neglect. But perhaps it would have looked differently here in the 1990s. Now, hard to believe, nearly 3 decades ago. Not nearly, I'm afraid exactly 3 decades ago when I lived here. I have to say it's funny. I must have crossed this bridge, the Libeňský bridge, thousands of times by tram, bike or car, but I never really thought about what was down here along the riverbank. That feels like a pretty good reminder of how many stories lie just off the main road, quietly waiting to be discovered. You might now hear a sound of a boat. I will try to record it closer. It's obviously a tugboat, but it's not tugging anything, and it's just another reminder, I would say, that the Vltava used to be a very lively transport route as well. Anyway, thank you for walking with me today. Rohanský ostrov, or Rohan Island, no longer truly an island, but still marked by its name, is a great example, I think, of how Prague keeps changing layer by layer. It sheds old skins, so to speak, and grows new ones. And if you look closely, you'll find that the past and future often sit quietly side by side. As always, thanks for listening to Prague Off the Beaten Track. You can find a map of today's walk, a fact box and a bit more information on the Prague Off the Beaten Track page at the Radio Prague International website. I'm Vít Pohanka. Thanks so much for being with me.
Prague Off the Beaten Track. Vít Pohanka takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.